And record.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to the Beaufort Technology Corridor. Super excited to talk about public sector innovation. It's an area that, I've specialized in for the last 8 years. I'll go into my background and my company's background, and then, how Beaufort could potentially start working more intimately with the government. Just to put it out there, I am radically focused on the national security side of the house. I have done some really interesting civic tech related things. But a lot of my context is kind of nested in DoD and the intelligence community and stuff. All right. So Adjective is the name of my company, and I'll be discussing, how to access government money to enable you, enable the people around you, enable your city. It's really exciting stuff. So who am I? Rob Murtha. Rob Murtha had an interesting background. So kind of, I guess, in descending order or ascending order. Actually started in art school, graduated art school in Florida, went to a school in Boca Raton called Lynn University. Really loved digital media in general and kind of the direction of everything visual and tech. Back then it was pretty, chaotic, unstructured, front-end web development meets graphic design type stuff. Now we've seen emerging markets like user experience, UX research. We've seen front-end development start to really merge with, human factors and human system interface design. So it's been an exciting field to kind of grow in. After college, I ended up joining the military as an intelligence operator. Deployed multiple times in support of the global war on terrorism. That was a really exciting journey. I actually have a cool little blog spot on adj.ai, my website for this company, about how I implemented kind of customer experience as a capability as an intelligence operator while I was overseas. It really got me obsessed with digital products and just customer experience and service. How do you provide value to your customers? After that, I became a instructor in the national security ecosystem, developed a wide range of curriculums for pretty technical tradecraft, and it inspired a handful of different defense technical programs, which is really exciting. I ended up moving over to the DOJ, where I think I was the first product designer for that specific, the specific entity I worked at. It was a crazy journey. The DOJ back in 2017 was pretty bureaucratic, pretty risk averse. So any kind of new positions, new perspectives was something that would challenge kind of the core of their culture. And it was an amazing experience. We had a 8-person scrappy team. We were able to build 2 tremendously valuable products that scaled to the enterprise and are still adopted today. Really rechanged the way this specific entity at the DOJ conducted investigations forever. We deprecated their kind of analog, point and shoot camera processes with a mobile application specifically written in React Native. And then we did some other really cool kind of network data transfer things that are kind of really only relevant to the sensitive security space. Then I decided, I was like, you know what, I might launch my own company. And right before I was able to do that, I was kind of intercepted by some of my mentors over in the Air Force that said, hey, we're building a startup. Do you wanna hop on board? And I was like, what does that entail? And they were like, well, you're going to go live out in Silicon Valley and stay in San Francisco for, a year and kind of embed with some of the startups there. And then you're going to move to Boston. You're going to help us launch this thing called Kessel Run, which was named after Star Wars, but it was an Air Force program. So I became an Air Force civilian, became this like product maniac and helped them launch this program in Boston, had overlap with, all the cool folks, MIT, Draper Labs, et cetera. Got a lot of exposure to what successful technology modernization looks like in the public sector, and how to build and transition organizations from a change management perspective in a feasible way without causing too much thrash so you can get things done. After that, I became a hybrid kind of growth innovation director at 2 separate companies, scaled them tremendously. I think it was around a combined $260 million worth of contracts in 2 years. It was really, really exciting. So that's my background. Now let's briefly talk about Adjective. So we officially launched April 1st. It was kind of a part-time thing for a while. It was something I was testing the water with. And I really launched Adjective just because there was so much demand. It was really interesting. I got to a point where as an executive at my previous company, I really couldn't focus on other things. So, and I knew there was just going to be more flexibility by being able to dynamically support people that have different, products, different capabilities, different needs. Quick overview of the company. Right now, we're in between this really unique area of delivery where it's kind of like we are a design company, and design means something different to everyone, right? So when it comes to Adjective, we're kind of the bridge between what you'd imagine is like advertising, marketing, and actual high fidelity product design. And what I mean by high fidelity actual product design is, we develop high fidelity prototypes that can be, outsourced, shipped overseas to be built, can be given to another company to manage and iterate on. It's really kind of the creative area of building products. How do you take a product, scope it effectively, and then find an actual pain point for the industry or domain you're supporting that's scalable, you can commercialize, et cetera. And all those things, are the reason why startups have like a 90% likelihood of failing. And I think kind of this new design, this heavy design / research approach to product development is going to become a major theme post like the SVB issues and some of these other venture capital issues. Any type of funds, including the DoD, are becoming hypersensitive around, realizing value, designing and articulating the value proposition of these things effectively, not just, pumping a bunch of, market capitalization numbers into a slide deck, but, putting the reps in and really building out these products and putting them in front of customers and users and getting that feedback before you even start iterating on the products. This is at like, the prove it type stage of commercialization. So what's unique about our company, we're kind of silly like other, startups in the tech space where, all of our members are referred to as modifiers. We have 4 titles right now. It's actually pretty tribal, but we all have design backgrounds. We have these like interesting growth, business development / design backgrounds. So our goal is to take products, take companies, pair them with markets more effectively, help them break into specific markets that they're, maybe far into, and come up with really creative ways that they can start realizing more value with the things they build. So who are some of our partners? Just quickly, today we're working with 4 companies, 4 startups. We're probably at capacity right now. We're in a big hiring cycle. So if you know anybody that has user experience, market research backgrounds, please send them our way. And my contact information is in the top right corner. I would love to, connect with anyone who's interested in the things I'm going to discuss today. I have a LinkedIn, just look me up, Rob Murtha, but that's my email address, rob@adj.ai. So we're supporting a wide range of tier 1 startups today. A couple of them are focused on supply chain, or one of them is focused on supply chain security and asset traceability, which is a big issue. I'm at the MRO conference in Atlanta this week. I can't stop hearing about people not knowing where their parts are when they send them overseas, and like understanding a certain time that they're going to be able to get their parts, really slowing down the ability to repair engines and fix things and get airplanes in the sky. So I think that's specific to MRO, but I mean, it's a wide range use case. They're doing really cool things. They spun out of MIT, working with another company that spun out of Stanford. Really awesome IP for IoT and sensor deployments. Bunch of really interesting edge cloud capabilities nested in that one. Another company I'm working with is focusing on cybersecurity automation and accreditation for go-to-market strategies. So how do you find a startup that wants to work with the government and not have them be burdened or hindered by this crazy process called the authority to operate? So they're solving that pain point to get more people working to the government more securely and more quickly. And then I'm also working with a Space Force digital transformation and DevSecOps initiative, which is really, really exciting. So what's one of the biggest issues facing and changing the way that government approaches, successful investments and good products? They've all realized that, whether they like it or not, they kind of live in this chain, this web of bureaucracy. And there's a lot of justification for it, right? Like the government regulates things that could completely spiral out of control. They manage our national security, and there's a ton of different areas that require a high level of policy. So as much as us technologists and innovators kind of sigh when we hear people kind of shut down ideas or add more time to our go to market because there's security implications. Typically there's a reason for it, but there's also a ton of waste when it comes to some of the bureaucracy and this circumventing that a lot of technologies that operate in the public sector and people that want to work with the government have to kind of overcome. And we specialize at looking at, and I think government innovators are really specializing, looking inward at the bureaucracy that doesn't translate to value, because some bureaucratic additional security features could translate to value, but the ones that are just completely wasteful, they're trying to pinpoint and find ways that they can reduce the pain that those kind of bureaucratic touch points create for great companies like y'all. So understanding the domain, I think this is one of the most difficult areas for companies that haven't worked with the government or haven't worked with the Department of Defense really struggle to overcome and spin up context. I've seen such varying results. Some companies really just hyper understand the domain and kind of adopt all of the jargon and the acronyms and decompose them really quickly. But I want to focus on how important it is to either conduct extensive research to spin up about a particular problem you're solving for the government, or partner with an entity that has the touch points in the government that can help accelerate your context and accelerate the gaps in your product lines, or accelerate how you may need to adjust your products to fit more nicely with a particular government agency. And it's not the way I say, and not to just make a plug for Adjective, but I think the design approach is a little different compared to other traditional consultants, where it's like, hey, I'm going to introduce you to this person. There's so much more to it, and I'm going to explain that in the next couple of slides. There's so much more, especially this day and age for the government than an introduction. It takes really detailed adaptation, I should say. So what are some really cool stories about the public sector and who's working on things that are digital transformation related? Who are some of these partners that we're going to be that are going to align with the acquisition strategies that I'm going to discuss later? So the government, since about 2017, maybe 2016, has embarked on this incredible journey to change the relationship they have with technology and change the relationship they have with just products in general. It doesn't have to be tech. It could be, hyper industrial. It could be a new type of, attachment for, machinery or something. But there's one great example I wanted to include in this overview is the advent of the software factory. So the software factory is a shop that's supposed to create different software sets that align with, for this specific example is the DoD, but there's software factories for every agency, right? There's an HHS, 18F does a ton of stuff with HHS. There's software factories that support USDA, but specifically this example is focused on the DoD, primarily the Air Force. So this is just the Air Force overlay. There's overlays for the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, et cetera. Everyone's kind of transitioning to this new software development model, which combines both vendor products and service developed products. So government off the shelf, they own the IP and they partner with a company to help them, build these products internally. And so here's a quick map of, how silly and fun it's all become. So my old organization, when I was giving my intro and describing kind of where I came from, Kessel Run up here in Boston was one of the first, I think it might've been the first back in 2017. But, you know, I always used to tease my leadership and say our greatest product was our story, because really we influenced people to just look at, you know, value creation in a different way. It didn't have to be the kind of same, you know, government technology experience where you partner with like this large company that also makes munitions or airplanes. But, you know, now all of a sudden they could also be, you know, subject matter experts in how you, orchestrate Kubernetes clusters and deploy them to air-gapped environments. You know, we suggested there needs to be somewhat of a threshold where you focus on the people that really love the thing that you expect them to build. And that's kind of what influenced all of these different software factories spawning. And there's huge ones here, like Platform One in San Antonio, Texas, for example. Massive program. And that's one of the programs you'll probably end up, you know, interfacing with if you do have a technology product that you want to deploy to the government, because they do a lot of the security accreditation. You have some other really cool ones like Ski Camp at a Hill Air Force Base. You know, and what's so cool about all these like silly fun software factories is they're all focused on mission threads that are like relevant to the area and the bases. For those of you that, you know, have military family members or have served, you know that, like, you know, bases really influence kind of the culture of the towns, and they're typically aligned with, you know, strategic mission areas of that geographic area. So yeah, it's really cool. This is just an overview of some of the people that you may interface with and may be relevant when I start to describe like the SBIR program, for example, because at one point in the SBIR program, you're going to have to reach out to, you know, people that may work at these types of software factories and get their signature on a memorandum that says like, oh yeah, I want to use their tech, I'm going to sponsor it. And then the people that evaluate your tech, you know, we'll look at that memorandum and we'll see the description and the milestones, and, you know, it could end up awarding you with a $1.25 million contract, which is really exciting. So over on the left here, some of these URLs, if you just want to take a snapshot, you know, the top four: DoD cybersitter.mil, AAL.army, Vulcan, AFWorks, those are all DoD focused. Challenge.gov is a really cool, low-hanging kind of Shark Tank style. Hey, these are some problems we have throughout the government. We would love to hear your feedback and see if you know, your technology can solve this, or your just, you know, ability to critically think. Sometimes it's like, hey, submit a case study or white paper, and we'll apply it to the problems that we've identified in our domain. So challenge.gov is really fun and flexible. And then sam.gov is the major repo that all of these things should, you know, roll back into. If you go to SAM, you can, you know, query any type of contract, even traditional government contracts there. That's where a lot of bids start, unless there's a specific government, but SAM's the primary one. So quick, just additional identifiers for the top four. So DoD cybersitter.mil, that's a really awesome one. Every single quarter, they release new SBIRs, Small Business Innovation and Research Awards. STTR is the academic equivalent. So CIBR is full-blown small business. STTR is hybrid small business and academia, or 501c3. So, you know, say you're a small business and you want to apply for, you know, a phase one SBIR, or sorry, phase one STTR. You would find a university, and I know this is a relevant use case for the Beaufort ecosystem. You will find a university or a 501c3 to partner with, and, you know, you would allocate at least 30% of the contract to one of those entities. And STTR is becoming, I think it's a way more popular pathway, just because there's far less competition. SBIRs are becoming extremely competitive. 2 years ago, it wasn't as bad, but now, with, you know, all of the startups in Silicon Valley that can prove out a commercialization strategy of, like, you know, tens of millions of dollars of investment, it's hard, because one of the things they care about in this program is the ability to survive what they refer to as, or what we all refer to as, the valley of death, where you end up in a situation where funding dries up, and you need to have like a large enough war chest to kind of get through the tough era. And their assumption, or their hypothesis, is that, you know, if you're a dual use technology, you know, if the DoD gets burdened with bureaucracy and can't continue to fund you just yet. Like they can't cut you another contract because there's some like political thing that's blocking your ability to access those funds, like policy related thing that's blocking your ability to access those funds. You'll be able to survive due to commercialization to then come back to the DoD at a later point. So that's kind of like their philosophy around commercialization. Below that, Army Applications Laboratory, the AAL.Army one, that's a really cool, kind of more focused platform where you could submit more. It's called like they're R&D funds, but they don't use them for R&D. The purpose isn't just for research. The purpose is to commercialize these things. A lot of savvy strategic acquisition leaders in the government and in the DoD are using these older R&D vehicles to circumvent bureaucracy and get to work with new companies that have new ideas and are trying to actually tackle real problems. So the Army Application Laboratory is a great one that's very dynamic. They have everything from, additive manufacturing stuff to full-blown software development and like data replication type needs. Below that, vulcansoft.com, great platform you have to sign up for. That one is extremely dynamic. They have so many acquisitions in there that are R&D related. I may use the term OTA. It stands for Other Transactional Authority. So that's another term for these like flexible acquisition mechanisms the government has. They call them OTs, or other transactions, where it's outside of the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. So there isn't this whole, if you're familiar with government contracting, or if you aren't, the FAR governs the way the government has to award contracts. And there's tons of competitive criteria where you have to compete it with, hundreds of people and like all this complexity. So these OT contracts allow government leaders to have a little more control over what they're investing in. And then AFWorks is famous. They're the ones that really optimize this OTA strategy, where they took this program, Small Business Innovation and Research Awards, and turned it into this kind of seed fund for the Air Force. So they're very cutting edge, very forward thinking. I didn't list DIU on here. That's another big one if anyone's interested in working with the DoD, but it's Defense Innovation Unit. They're spectacular. They've had some really famous investments. They've worked with SpaceX. They've worked with all these really cool commercial partners and kind of brought them to national security use cases and outcomes. But they're crushing it. So this is an example of some of the cool modernization programs specifically for the Air Force. So like think about this map and think about every other agency in the government. And there's probably similar entities. And if you're interested, please get in touch. I can help you discover some of those that align better with your product lines. So why it makes so much sense for Beaufort. This is like a really fun one. So I think like when I think about DoD innovation and funding, there's the usual suspects, right? There's a bunch of modernization companies in the DC area that are responding to these things. There's a bunch of R&D firms in Boston, a ton in Northern California, and now you're starting to see some Austin folks kind of get into it with Capital Factory out there. I think there's a ton of value in including a wide range of people that have experienced geographically different needs for their communities, for their specific markets from a defense perspective. I know there's a bunch of bases around us in the Low Country. There's so much value in the diversity of innovation that creates like variance and reduces kind of it prevents the DoD and the Pentagon from kind of putting on the DC blinders and just marching towards things that they are kind of just like too redundant. It's a good word. It's just redundancy. It's like, oh, we're going to have the same criteria every single time and continue to get such a low return on investment for what we, sponsor technology wise or product wise. I think Beaufort has a lot of really cool theme and cultural attributes and initiatives with all the cybersecurity stuff going on. It's like they need to have a direct kind of pipeline into national security outcomes and into really cool like health and human services outcomes and everything government. I think the funding from these programs and the flexibility of it could really help overlap with the cybersecurity initiatives that Beaufort's kind of really stacking their chips on, which is freaking awesome. I think funding could help the maritime element of Beaufort. There's a ton of really interesting maritime research that, the Navy, for example, with their SBIR programs are looking at funding and exploring. I know NIWIC is a really big fan of the Open Topic SIBR program, and I'm going to explain what Open Topic SIBRs mean in the next couple slides. And then funding that could help reinforce infrastructure and launch businesses. So I stopped at a restaurant last time I was in Beaufort, actually for the cybersecurity conference, and I had a brief convo with one of the restaurant owners there, who's like heavily involved in the city, and I was blown away by how inspired he was by the people and just the culture of Beaufort, and how passionate he was about, adding like different perspectives to the town from a capital, I guess from a capital point of view. He wants to bring interesting talent. He would love to see interesting talent come to the city, settle down, create startups, introduce like new layers of economic resiliency to the town, because that just fuels all of the awesome tourism and the businesses, and everything else starts to kind of really align well. So I think by working with the government through these innovation programs, and they're not grants, they're full-blown contracts. They're considered full and open vehicles and prime contracts if you get awarded one of these. I think it could bring a lot of stability to the economy in Beaufort. So when it comes to the government from like a development and let's do more with less perspective when it comes to how they move their resources around, there's kind of three categories at every layer of working with the government that I've seen changing and evolving rapidly. So, there's typically three leaders that you have to align and convince to end up kind of landing a deal with the government. And I can expand on this another time, but just to go through it semi-briefly. So there's the technology, there's the advent of this technology or innovation thought leader in the government. That's kind of a new thing. There's always been kind of CIO types, cybersecurity people that have orbited the government space and have been in charge of programs and kind of imposing policy on, IT stuff. But now there's full-blown, commercial style, tech leaders that are like, hey, all right, so I'm going to be assigned to, like, one example, there's a brand new or 7 months old chief technology officer for Central Command, which is one of the combatant commands in the DoD. So they're focused on kind of Southwest Asia, the Middle East, et cetera. And they have a CTO that's very similar to what you'd see in the private sector, where it's like, hey, like you have a technology need, it's probably slightly different than your European counterparts or your Indo-Pacific counterparts. How are you going to organize your technology strategy and your product strategy to deliver these outcomes that are relevant for your domain? How are you going to capture research in your domain and reduce risk the same way that a tech company would have a go-to-market for, say, Jacksonville or Savannah, Beaufort? So there's a lot of new modern methodologies being introduced, and it's all segmented into really niche little areas that all have different needs and pain points. In addition to that, acquisition leaders are changing, right? So like we talked about hacking bureaucracy and finding ways to get a higher return on investment for public sector funds. And, this is good for all of us taxpayers. From a national security perspective, our warfighters are going to benefit from, more mindful use of funds and resources and capital. So acquisition leaders are kind of changing the way that they're investing in things. And then you look at the operational leaders, and they're adapting as well. We just transitioned from a completely different type of conflict that was the priority to a brand new conflict type with the release of this new, the recent 2022 National Defense Strategy. So, we were inundated with more kind of counterinsurgency, global war on terror outcomes, which has a completely different, list and range of requirements than, more of the strategic Cold War-esque, balance of powers, near peer adversary type stuff that we're seeing start to emerge now. And just to transition on, I'm going to focus on the contract vehicles, and I'm going to deep dive on some of those different strategies that you could employ to work with the government using R&D funding, such as SBIRs, like I mentioned earlier. but we're gonna kick off with kind of the same theme of the things that are starting to change within the government, technology acquisitions and operations. Those three things you have to align when, getting someone to buy off on your product or the technology you're offering. Some examples of, how these different areas have been changing for the government. If you worked with the government in the past and you're interested in kind of really deep diving on some of these little, categories, I broke it down by policies, processes, and philosophies. But one example for technology, so policy-wise, like how is that adapting? So the continuous authority to operate. So if you're familiar with accreditation in the DoD, you have to get all of your technology kind of checked off, and they scrutinize it over a long period of time. They used to leverage more of like a waterfall method of checking off your technology. So they would give you this long list of things that you had to account for when you're building this system. This, a lot of times they'd call it like a system of record or a weapon system in the DoD anyhow. And you would have to, scrutinize the way you're building it, organize all this stuff up front, but people realize that that doesn't really work with how quickly technology is evolving and how there's this decentralized use of software libraries to build applications. So they were like, why don't we just make this a continuous thing? Let people deploy to our secure networks maybe a little more quickly, but also monitor it for the lifetime of the application that's being built, which is kind of more logical. So that's called the CATO. Processes. So I'm sure you've seen it. Everyone's, adapting different flavors of Agile, whether it's Scrum or Safe or extreme programming. Everyone's kind of adopting this new method of delivery, just because they've seen some of the pitfalls of waterfall and how it, accrues a lot of risk over time when it's just you're building based on assumptions and you don't have a relationship with the chaotic nature of building software and discovering if you've built the wrong feature or not and how you can quickly remediate that, et cetera. And then philosophy is zero trust. We've seen a lot about that for security. How do you start with security first with these systems and then kind of walk your way back to highly specific access-based control or attribute-based control, based access control or role-based access control. Or policy-based access control. So there's a lot of really fun stuff going on with zero trust when it comes to technology culture. Acquisitions cultures. We talked about OTs, other transactional authorities, OTAs. Those are really exciting. It circumvents a ton of bureaucracy. If the government determines that there's something they need and they want to stitch into one of their product portfolios, they can find a really quick way to work with you. Processes. There's this new approach to acquisitions called adaptive acquisitions, and it was created by Defense Acquisitions University, and it's actually influencing acquisitions across the government, not just defense. And it's almost like this agile way to approach acquisitions, where there's this like modular contracting, where instead of scrutinizing relationships so hard or scrutinizing bids so hard, they'll have like a tech challenge. Let anyone who's interested in bidding on the proposal participate in that tech challenge. They'll award a contract and then have like a really lightweight kind of option year structure to it. So if like there is an issue after a year, they're not stuck for 5 years and then they can write a new contract. They can pivot the contract after a year or 6 months, whatever. So that's really exciting. Philosophies, they just realize, the acquisition approaches of the past just like won't work. We're in a unique time period where we have to move very quickly to, catch up from a national security and technology perspective, and they realize that. Operational culture, I touched on this earlier. The National Defense Strategy kind of articulates this change of focus, and that change of focus is pivoting from counterinsurgency, what you saw in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, and more towards near peer adversaries, the types of things we're seeing in Europe. And processes wise, you look at a crusty old general. Now they're all talking about data centricity, data understanding. How secure is the data? How can you trust it? How are you federating that data between various systems, various devices? They're becoming extremely technical, which is really exciting. So here we go. Here's the good stuff. These are. I broke down the SIVRs and STTRs into open topics and posted topics, and there's really important nuance there, and I'll explain that. But this slide is, the slide where you can start to develop your own business's acquisition strategy, and how can you start to access capital from the government. These are 4 different vehicle types for working with the government, and 4 different mechanisms to work with the government. So I'll describe each one specifically, and if I leave anything out, or you have more questions about a particular one, just reach out to me and I'll explain it deeper. But so the Small Business Innovation Research Program I mentioned earlier is, a way for the government to, historically it was a way for the government to invest in research, but there are some brilliant acquisition leaders that notice the flexibility of those contract vehicles, and they're turning it more into like seed funding or Series A rounds or something, the equivalent of that for the government. And it's really, really exciting. I mean, I'll talk about the financial ranges later, but so an open topic is essentially a release that AFWorks kind of invented, where it's like, hey, there's no specific topic. Here are like 10 or 15 themes that we're interested in, but if you want to respond to it, respond to it. You may have a product, you may just have an idea, but you can have an action if you articulate the problem well enough and describe the commercialization strategy and how it benefits, the operational user that you're kind of referencing. You can have an opportunity to not only win a phase 1, which is like $75,000, but win a direct to phase 2, which is 1.25 million to 1.75 million. So it's a substantial amount of money to really help bootstrap, or support your company, and the criteria to partner with the government is very digestible. It's the phase 1 is just research, kind of. It's like, hey, explore this domain and give us feedback on what you've discovered. Phase 2 is like, all right, develop this proof of concept and make sure you're interacting with, this technical point of contact that we have for you. So that's really exciting. The posted topic, and sorry, so the open topic, real quick before I transition on, is really open to anyone who wants to submit. It's highly competitive, but there's still a way bigger chance of kind of landing an open topic by just, throwing a Hail Mary at it a little bit. The posted topic is actually the opposite. So the posted topic is if you reached out to a government partner, started to discuss pain points, and then they were like, hey, let's create a SIBR together. And then they post the topic. It's not open, it's very specific, and it's aligned with your exact technology. Other people can bid on it. Other people can respond to it, but the likelihood of them getting selected when you've kind of helped the government think through a problem and you've articulated the performance work statement is pretty low. So, stumbling upon a posted topic, you're going to see them on those URLs I mentioned. But if there's a posted topic on that DoD SIBR sitter URL, that's where they'd be. The likelihood of winning that is pretty low. There are situations where people have kind of, taken a shot at a posted topic and been awarded over the people that helped define the problem. But it's just rare. Broad agency announcements are kind of unique. Both broad agency announcements and commercialization solutions, or CSOs, commercial solutions offerings, are very, very similar. They're just different in designation. And it's essentially like a government agency, it's almost like a government agency creating, they want to create like their own internal kind of case study. And then they publish that case study to, like, say, sam.gov, that one website I was telling you about earlier. And then they allow people to, like, interpret and digest that case study. And then you can respond to it with, like, how you'd approach the situation or what portion of that case study you may be able to impact. And those broad agency announcements, or CSOs, the case study itself is often aligned with a contract vehicle and a budget ceiling. So there may be a BAA, a broad agency announcement, that's aligned to $50 million. And as people respond to the BAA, if the government likes what they see, and it's also coupled with reaching out to folks and learning more about their domain and pain points and stuff, you kind of do both at the same time. If they like what you submitted, they could respond and say, hey, give us an RFQ, or they'll provide an RFQ, request for a quote. And then you put together kind of a rough order of magnitude and what it would take to achieve, something at whatever fidelity level the government's interested in. Maybe you t-shirt size it. It's like, here's a proof of concept, here's a minimum viable product, here's a, like, full-blown kind of real deal relationship. And you have the different cost and time details associated with those. So those are the contract vehicles. And this is what you can expect from a funding perspective, specifically for the SBIR and STTR programs. Remember, I mentioned STTR is like the academic 501c3 version. They're in phases, and then they go up to program of record, POR. That's like the ultimate goal. It's super rare. They're really focusing on how they can start to transition those phase threes to program of records. I'll explain that more in a little bit. But phase one, essentially it's 75K to 150K typically. They're way lower threat, way lower requirements. So typically for a phase one, you'll see a 25-page pitch deck, and there's a template that you can download that you kind of put your own flair into, and you add all of the different things about your product, you know, how it's valuable to the government entity you're working with, what's your commercialization strategy, you know, what are your revenue metrics, you know, how legit is your product idea. You know, there are people that literally launch an SBIR phase one with an idea and don't really have all of the structure around their product yet, and they're successful. It's all about how compelling the need is and what you're interested in, and really selling yourself. Another thing is like selling yourself behind all of these research programs. The government likes to partner with, you know, people that have unique backgrounds and can align really well with the problem that they're suggesting that they can solve for the government. So resumes is a big portion of the submission package for all these SBIRs. Which is kind of different compared to the BAAs and the commercial solutions offerings. So that's phase one. Phase two, you know, you have a higher likelihood of transitioning a phase one to a phase two than you do it just going direct to phase two. Phase two starts to have, you know, a higher threshold of prep. So for a phase two, you typically need, you always need a customer memorandum signed. So you get a customer of that's going to sponsor the adoption of your product or the adoption of this good idea that you have, and then an end user that's going to benefit from it. You have to get both of them to sign off on a customer memorandum. And one portion of that customer memorandum is like a long list of milestones that you hope to achieve, and what the impact of those milestones for that joint organization is. And so you need that customer memorandum signed, you know, and then it helps to demonstrate, you know, funding. So like if you can get an organization to pledge money towards your idea, it increases your likelihood of award. Just a couple of quirks there. But that's typically, so the phase one's a 3-month engagement. The phase two's anywhere from 12 to 18 months. Moving on to phase three. So that's outside of kind of, it's still considered an SBIR, but that funding doesn't come from like an R&D pool. So phase one and phase two comes from this kind of allocated R&D pool of funds. Phase three is specifically from the units you're working with. So the value of having a phase two is, even if the unit you're working with says, oh, we don't have the funding, or maybe we just don't see an immediate need for the thing that we, you know, the proof of concept we iterated on, you could find somebody else that has, you know, funding on hand. And this is a good time of the year to look because it's closing in on the fiscal year. You can get them to put their actual programmatic funding, the funding they palmed for from Congress, towards your SBIR. And then, you know, that's anywhere from, you know, north of 1.75 million to, you know, up to, I've seen SBIR phase threes be 8, you know, 10 million. I've seen, you know, very substantial 24 million phase threes. There's this concept called phase three IDIQ, but that's pretty much when you start to transition to a program of record. But I've seen them awarded for, you know, not cash, but there's this concept of a ceiling value. So $500 million ceilings over 5 years. So you get, essentially you have $500 million of technology capability to build. So like, it's complex. I'll discuss that another time. If somebody's interested, please follow up. But you don't get handed $500 million. It's like, this is the cap that you can essentially iterate towards, but there's value in having that cap. And then program of record means the government stands up a formal program around your product or your idea. And that's the real deal. And they're very focused on how do you transition more phase three SBIRs and, you know, proof of concept projects into programs of record. So here's an example of just like the posting of a commercial solutions offering or a BAA. It might look very similar to this, but this is a snapshot of SAM.gov. So Kessel Run's the old organization I used to work for. DevSecOps is a philosophy, process, and approach to using tools. It stands for development, security, and operations. It's a way to deliver software continuously to an end user and to an organization that you support. So this CSO is essentially like, hey, we do DevSecOps, And then once you click this link, it'll bring you to that kind of more case study looking page. It's like, we do all of these really cool things. How can you affect these really cool things with what you offer? And as you can see, the current response date, usually if you're familiar with working with the government, you'll see current response date be like, anywhere from 2 to 6 months after the posting. But this is for years upon years, because they're going to leave it open and just use it as a way to get decent ideas and to create relationships with people. And so that's the end of my presentation. We got 4 minutes to spare, which is like really, really cool. Like I said, my contact information is up in the top right. Please follow up and connect with me. I'd love to hear from you. My LinkedIn's a little quirky. You have to click you could follow me if you just click follow, but if you click the 3 ellipses and click connect, I'd be excited to connect with you. And if you're in the Low Country area, hang out with me. I live in Savannah, love the city, getting heavily involved through a 501c3, working with the city quite a bit. So I have an immediate goal to find a stronger, more resilient bridge between Savannah and Beaufort. I'm really jazzed about that.
Thank you so much, Rob, for your time today. I'll open it up for any questions anyone might have, but we appreciate you sharing all that great information with us about how we can partner with the government on particular projects.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm back.
Hey.
Couldn't see anyone while I was sharing my screen.
Rob, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing these resources. It's good to know that you're in the community, and someone that's got this sort of process wired, and the acronyms with the government. I'm already trying to figure out how to get challenge.gov into one of the courses that I teach to make it part of an assignment. So
awesome.
It's really inspiring how anyone watching this video could go take a look at these opportunities and start moving forward with ideas.
That's great feedback. And if there's anyone like in your courses that like would want just feedback, please make a connection, and I'll hop on for a 30-minute deep dive, 15-minute, whatever they have. I'll even speak to the class, whatever, to go a little deeper on some of these initiatives. Like if you do identify like an opportunity, I can decompose it with the class, help kind of structure what approaching bidding on it would look like, and some of like the risks associated with it. And like I know the product owner of challenge.gov as well on the government side of the house. She's a GSA innovator. So just let me know. I'm here to help.
That is super generous. I appreciate it. You may be hearing from me on that.
Yeah, I don't have any questions yet because I'd have to digest this. It was a lot, and I really appreciate, and clearly you're quite accomplished in the field. I would love to learn more. I'd love to connect and meet at some point. It takes me a while. I'm a counselor. It takes me a while to process things. I have to let it percolate for a little bit.
I'm right there with you. I'm the same way.
Well, thank you very much. I'll stop recording, and then I hope everyone has a great day.